Okay, now having discussed Kmitza itself and the avodah of the Likud Halavona, we now move on to what's called Matan Kli, which you'll see here on page Yud Beis on the left column. He says that after the Kmitza, we have to put the Kometz itself into a Kli Shares. So in other words, we started with one Kli, but that was not necessarily Kli Shares. And we had the entire volume of Soles in Kli number one, we'll call it. And now, after he does the Kmitza, he takes that Kometz out of the first Kli and puts it into a second Kli. The status of the second Kli is that of a Kli Shares. And that's going to sanctify the Kmitza with the Kedusha of Kedusha Saguf, Limizbeach. So now we can do the Haktarah of the Kometz on the Mizbeach. Now, when we implement the Kohen, when the Kohen implements this Nesina, taking the Kohen and putting it into a Kli Shares, that's parallel to Kabbalas Hadam in Zvachim. And we'll try to explain what that means. He says the following. In the case of Kabbalah, basically what you're doing is you're putting the dam from the Tzavar Behema into a Kli Shares, into a Mizrah. Again, you're not actually putting it in, you actually just passively receive it, but it doesn't matter. That Kabbalah is considered as if you actively place the dam into the Kli Shares, sanctifying it, so that now we can take it to the Mizbeach and do the Zrika on the Mizbeach. In a parallel sense, when we take the Kometz and put it into a Kli Shares, the receiving of the Kometz by the Kli Shares, so to speak, when the Kohen puts it in there, is called Kabbalah. And this Kabbalah, like Kabbalah Saddam in a Kli Shares in Zevach, is Mekadesh the Kometz. Now, in the footnote here, he asks the following question. Why do we need to be Makadesh the Kometz through the Nesina into the Kli when you already had that Kometz in the first Kli? He says, V'afagav shekras kadsha hamincha b'tchilosa b'nesinas hakli, Lesina l'Kli, yesh lashuv, to repeat, u'lekadesh es hakometz b'Kli sheni b'kedusha miyuchedes. And if I understand correctly, he's saying that the first kiddush in Kli number one is only a partial kiddush, but it hasn't yet been sanctified with the unique kiddushas mizbeach of Haktorah. In other words, when you put the soles in the first Kli, yes, you're right, it's mekadesh the soles, but not for Haktorah al gabi mizbeach. It doesn't have, and it hasn't received a Kedusha Saguf. Call it a Kedusha Damin. It's definitely sanctified for the Beis HaMikdash, but not necessarily Kedusha Saguf l'Mizbeach. To be Mekadesh Kedusha Mizbeach, I need the Kometz. Once we have the Kmitza, now we can take the Kometz, put it into a Kli Shares, and now take that Kli Shares and bring it to the Mizbeach in order to be Maktir the Kometz on the Mizbeach. So that's a higher level of Kiddush, of sanctification, that is engendered by the second Kli when the Kohen puts the Kometz into the second Kli. And he quotes the Gemara in Sota that Kometz tzorach Kiddush Sheni kishem shedam tzorach Kiddush Kli af al pi she'eskach al yidei asakin b'shchit. Again, the parallel to a Zevach, that in the case of a Zevach, once the Kohen, or it could be even a Zar, has done the Shechita, the Sakin itself is a Kli Shares, and the Dam that comes out that had a contact with the Kli Shares is already Niskadesh, but yet we need to receive the Dam in a Kli Shares. Sakin is not enough, and now the Dam reaches and it attains a higher level of Kiddush, singled out, as it were, for Haktorah al Gabi Mizbeach, or Zrika al Gabi Mizbeach. And by parallel, the same thing applies to the Nesinas HaKometz in a Kli Shares, which now is Makadosh a higher level of Kiddush in the Kli Shares for the Aktorah of the Kometz on the Mizbech. Now, what happens if he takes the Kometz and he splits it into two? He puts half of it in one Kli and the other half in another Kli. Ein HaKometz Miskarish L'Chatzoin. Okay, fine. So there's no Kiddush. We need the entire Kometz in one single Kli. And that doesn't surprise us. We've seen that before. However, what would be if after he split the Kometz and put half in one Kli and half in the other Kli, he pours the half of Kometz from one Kli into the Kli that has the other half of Kometz. Now he has a full Kometz in one Kli. Do we say that since initially he did a Nesina Bechatzoim, that now disqualifies the Kometz? Or do we say no? We haven't yet reached the level of his Kadshus. The Kiddush is not Chal because he doesn't have a full Kometz in one Kli, but that's rectifiable. Is there such a word in English? Rectifiable. And then when he subsequently puts the second half of the Kometz together with the first half in one Kli, that's fine. Is therefore imli achar mikan chazar v'nosan es shnei achatzoyin b'kli echad harem kedoshim uksherim l'aktorah. You can still salvage the situation by combining the two chatzoyin into one kli. Now here we have a Mishnah Lamelech. The Mishnah Lamelech says that we assume a parallel between Kometz and Dam. We learn a lot of things about Kometz from Dam. In Dam, the halacha is that if, for whatever reason, there was no Kiddush at the moment of Kabbalah Sadam, when it went into the Kli, Shuvei Yochel Lachzar Ulahachshir Sadam Liolam. It's equal to a case of Nishpach Adam al Ritzvah. If you remember, we discussed that if the dam goes from the Tzavra Behema onto the Ritzvah Sazora, it's possible, and you cannot collect the dam from the Ritzvah and do a Zrikas Adam. It's completely disqualified, irreversible. And therefore, if at the time of the Kabbalah Sadam there was some reason why the Kiddush could not take place, whatever that reason might be, then that's it. The dam would not be able to be subject to a subsequent Kiddush. It's either Kiddush B'Shas, Knisa L'Kli, or no Kiddush at all. It's an all or nothing proposition. So the Mishnah Mel says, I don't understand. If he splits the Kometz into two halves, half of which went to Kli A and half into Kli B, then the Kabbalah Hadam, meaning the Kabbalah HaKometz in this case, was not able to effectuate a Kiddush because ain't Kiddush L'Chatzoin. How could he then subsequently combine this Chetzi Kometz with that Chetzi Kometz? It's like the case of Dam. If the Kabbalah Hadam was not effective and not valid, then you cannot be machshir the Dam. The Dam is possible, irreversible. So the Mishnah Melch answers, he says, if came gamim nosan l'chatzoin, yesh lo liposel li'ola, yesh l'chalik ben dam l'kometz. So again, the whole kash of the Mishnah Melch is based on an analogy, an equation between dam and kometz, and at the end he says yesh l'chalik. I don't know exactly what he means. I just can tell you that kometz is not exactly the same as dam. In dam, I understand that the dam, when it's flying, if it falls on the ritzpah, it's possible. So the Kabbalah Sadam has to step in and effectuate the kiddush. In the case of kometz, the kmitza itself in the first kli has generated kedusha. He needs a nesina into another kli, which is ke'en Kabbalah Sadam in in Zvachim, but it's not exactly equivalent to Kabbalah Sadam. Perhaps it's just a preliminary stage to get to the Haktorah. And if he didn't, no, you know what? Maybe I would say it a little differently. That in the case of the Dam, there was a Kabbalah Sadam, but there was a deficiency in the ability, the power of the Kabbalah to effectuate Kedusha. Here, in this case of L'chatzon, I would say there was never a Kabbalah Sadam to begin with. So let's say, for example, there was never Kabbalah Sakomets to begin with. So let's say in Dam, let's say he needs a minimum of a Kezayis Dam for Zrik al Gabi Mizbech or Revius Dam, whatever the shear is. And he would be Makabel a half a Revius and then be Makabel in a different Kli, another half a Revius. It could be that he can combine the Dam into one Kli. Why? Because Kabbalah in a Kli, in a case where you have less than the required minimum volume of Dam, that's not called a Kabbalah. So nothing happened in the meantime. It's not on the Ritzvahs Hazara. It's in a Kli Shares, but the Kli Shares cannot be considered a Kabbalah if it's less than a shear. Now, there might be a Tana, Rabbi Shimon, who rejects everything that we said and does not require that there be a nesina of the komets into a second Kli. However, exactly what Rabbi Shimon says, we don't know. And his opinion is recorded in Mishnah in Menachos Daf Chavav. And according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the Gemara quotes an Amora Rav Nachman that everybody, even Rav Shimon, agrees that the Komets needs a Kiddush B'Kli. However, there are other Amoraim, Rav Yehuda and Rav Yanai. They say that according to Rav Shimon, Ein Tzarech L'Kadesh HaKomets B'Kli Yochel Laktiro Miyad Liachar Kmitza. In other words, there is no din of Kabbalah in Kmitza, according to Rav Shimon, in this opinion of Rav Shimon, that would parallel Kabbalah in Dam, meaning you can't take a Dam from the Tzavar after the Shechita and, so to speak, drag the animal over to the Mizbeach and do some sort of a Zrika. You need Kabbalah Sadam. But according to Rav Shimon in Kmitza, once the Kohen does the Kmitza, he's got the komets in his hands. All he has to do, says Rav Shimon, is take the komets over to the Mizbeach and burn it on the Mizbeach, do the Aktar. There is no requirement of Kabbalah. And if you'll ask me, well, what was the Kiddush? It'll be the first Kli. All right. Now we discuss something with regard to the komets that's very similar to what we discussed yesterday with regard to the Levona, but now we're talking about the komets. And what happens if the Kli itself, where he placed the komets, is on the karka? Is there a requirement that the Kli that receives the komets, again, we're assuming now like the Chachamim that you require a Kiddush Kli, a Kabbalah, it has to be in the hands of the Kohen. L'das Rabbi Yirmiyah, this is Gemara Menachos Daf Zayin, Mekachim es hakomets b'kli shal gabi karka. Any kli, even if the kli is resting on the ground, is effective for kiddush hakomets. L'das Avini v'Rava ein mekachin also ela b'kli hamunach b'yad hakohen. The Kohen has to be holding on to the kli, just like in the case of Kabbalah Sadam and Zevach, the Kohen has to hold on to the kli. Now, what this means is that the avodah of Kabbalas HaKomets begins when the Kohen, again, I'm going according to Avimi and Rav, when the Kohen picks up the kli, even before the komets was poured into that kli. And therefore, we're going to require two kohanim, one kohen to lift up the kli, and another kohen to pour the komets into the kli that's in the hands of the first kohen. So a kohen acher, like bia es hakli biyamino. He has another important point. Which hand is being used by the kohen hamagbiya es hakli? Got to be yad yamin, because that's the beginning of the avodah of Kabbalah. Now I'm going to assume, I hope I'm putting my neck out here, but I think this is partial, that in Kabbalah Saddam, in Zevach, the Kohen would have to pick up the kli, we call it a mizrah, in his right hand. The very moment he picks up the kli, he's already involved in the process of Kabbalah Saddam. He's setting up the Kabbalah Saddam. Because the Kabbalah Saddam requires that the kli be in the yad of the Kohen. And the yad of the Kohen means that the Kohen now has to lift up the kli. So too, in the case of komets, the Kohen that's receiving the komets in the kli has to be picking up the kli in his right hand. Now, let's say for argument's sake, at time T1, the Kohen lifted up the kli which is left hand. At time T2, when the komets is poured into that kli, the Kohen is holding the kli in his right hand. In other words, he moved the kli from his left hand to the right hand. That would be fine. And now he quotes the Keren Ora. The Keren Ora is one of the major pillars amongst the Achronim on Zvachim, on Kodshim. And he writes that Agboas HaKli hi chelek me'avodas ha'holacha. Val kein eina kshera ela b'kuhuna ubiyad yamin. So whereas I called it an avodah of Kabbalah, the Keren Ora calls it an avodah of holacha. I don't think there's any significance. Oh, maybe that's what he says now. I don't know. He quotes the Ola Shlomo. Shumi shum shu chelek mi'avodas matan hakomets mikli. That probably means Kabbalah. Let's just think about that. Is there any difference between Holacha and Kabbalah? I'm just going to take a guess. I'm take a shot at this. What I'm about to tell you might be totally absurd. Remember, we had Rav Shimon's Shita before, according to one set of Amoroim, who understood that according to Rav Shimon, the Kohen can take the komets directly onto the Mizbeach. We don't even need a Kabbalah in a Kli Sharetz. But keep in mind that even according to Rav Shimon, when the Kohen moves towards the Mizbeach with his komets, that's halacha. And Reb Shimon can't deny that that's an avodah of halacha. I mean, I shouldn't say can't deny it, but assuming he wouldn't deny it, then that's called halacha. Now, if we assume, according to Reb Shimon, there's no requirement of Kabbalah in a Kli, you could take it directly from the Yad HaKometz all the way to Mizbeach, then the act of putting it into the Kli is totally superfluous. It's totally redundant. So therefore, l'chora, you would come to the conclusion that putting the komets into a kli is nothing more than a technicality. Let's say the Kohen can't get to the Mizbeach right now, so he wants to, in the meantime, put it into the Kli. It's just technical. Because Rav Shimon doesn't require a Nesina L'Kli. However, if you accept the inside of the Karen Ora, I think what the Karen Ora is coming to be Mechadesh is that even Rav Shimon would agree that there are special dinim that apply to that Nesina L'Toch HaKli, not because of Kabbalah, because Reb Shimon cuts out Kabbalah in the case of the Komet, but because of Halacha. Reb Shimon might agree to Halacha. So therefore, the person who is receiving the Komets in the Kli, which again we thought was a technicality according to Reb Shimon, that's not a technicality. Says the Karen, that's the beginning of Halacha. And even Reb Shimon would recognize the significance of Halacha. We're going to require a Kohen, and not only that, Yad Yumin, not the Torah's Kabbalah, because Reb Shimon cuts out Kabbalah, but the Torah's Halacha. Just a thought. Now, what happens if we assume, like the Chachamim of Reb Shimon, that we need Nesina L'Kli, which in a classic engineer would mean that you put the komets on the bottom of the kli, inside the kli, but instead he somehow was able to attach the komets to the side of the kli. It's inside the airspace of the kli, but it's not on the bottom of the kli. It's adhesed, if there's such a word, he adhesed it to the side of the kli. I'm going to skip this for a second. Safeku im havi nesina kshera. Oshi psula mipnei she'ein kan nesina kitikuna. So the Gemara vacillates, and this becomes an open-ended teku. What happens? Does he need a nesina to the bottom of the kli, or a nesina inside the kli, inside the airspace of the kli? The nafkamina is going to be hidbik lidofnei kli. And a second issue is, what if he turns the kli upside down? Now, I should do a show and tell here, but some kalim, you'll notice that when you turn them upside down, the bottom of the kli, which is now upside down, has an indent. Meaning, if you look at the kli in its normal shape, you would see a little mound, a little hill on the bottom of the kli, right? It goes round and up. What happens if he puts the komets into what technically could be considered the air space of the kli, but the kli is upside down? Do we say that that's enough because the kli is lamaisa carrying this komets, or do we say no? That's not called the nesina l'kli because we need nesina kitikuna, meaning the normal way you would put something in a kli. And this completes our discussion about matan kli, and now we go on to a discussion about holacha. Li'achar shakmitza nitna hakometz l'kli v'alavona b'kli molichin osa el hamizbeh. V'hi achas me'avodas hamincha. We said there were 4 avodas in the mincha. That was on page Yuda Aleph. Yeah, Yuda Aleph, avodas hamincha. We had kmitza. We had matan kometz b'kli. Holachas hakometz l'mizbeach, just like holacha and dam, and finally the haktoras hakometz. We're on number 3 now. Holacha. Yeah, achas me'avodas hamincha kol dine avoda noagim bo, and therefore we're going to require a kohen yad yamin. This is holacha. Okay. Now, regard to avoda, as we've discussed on numerous occasions, there's something called a machshava poselis. Well, let's say a carbon has one night following the day, and he had in mind at the moment of one of the four avodos that this carbon would be eaten the following day. It's not a shlom, it's a carbon chatas, so it's only yom v'layla. So that machshava of chutz l'zmano passes the carbon if he has that machshava during one of the four avodos. What about halacha in the case of mincha? Does he have a machshava poselis? And one sheet, as we'll soon see, says absolutely yes. Why should halacha as one of the four avodos in komet be any different than the halacha as one of the four avodos in zevach, where a machshava poselis? However, l'das Rabbi Shimon eno poselis. Now, if I understand correctly, could you imagine the following scenario? The Kohen is standing right at the foot of the Mizbech. They bring him a kli that has solus in it. He does the kmitza, and he takes the kometz and he just puts it on top of the Mizbech. If he has a good throwing arm, he plays for the Chicago Cubs, and he puts it on top of the Mizbech. According to Rabbi Shimon, that should be perfectly okay, because Rabbi Shimon says that you can go from the kometz directly onto the haktorah al gabi mizbeach. You can completely cut out the need for halacha. Again, in 99.9% of the cases, he's standing at a distance from the mizbeach, and therefore you have to bring the kometz over to the mizbeach for haktorah purposes, and he needs halacha. But in theory, he wouldn't need halacha. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon holds that if he has a machshava poselis b'shas halacha, ain't a poselis. Why? Mishum she avoda she'efshal levatla. We have two categories of avoda. There's an avoda that's an absolute requirement, and then there's an avoda that is generally required, but it's not necessary. If you can avoid it and find it unnecessary, you can circumvent it and drop it. That's what halacha is. Shekain efshal likmots. Oh, he doesn't have, in my case, where he throws it and he's standing on the foot of the mizbeach. Mizbeach is 10 amos high, so he's not such a great pitcher. But rather, he is actually doing the kmitza as he stands on the rosh hamizbeach, which is where the maracha, where the fire is. Umakteres hakovetz miyad b'bli lo licha. Because according to Reb Shimon, that's exactly what could be done. That as soon as you do the kovetz, you could do the haktorah. And that classifies and defines halacha as an avodah she'efshal levatla, an avodah that could be avoided. Such an avodah does not have a status of machshava hapos. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop here in our introduction to Kodshim. And if you'd like, you could say goodbye to Steve here. Steve is leaving in a few hours to Chicago to watch the Cubs. And I remember when I was an avid B'nai Kivanik in high school, and I visited my friends in Chicago. I'll never forget, I was on the streets of downtown Chicago. I don't know if you've seen this today. And I saw someone with a kippah, a knitted yarmulke that said Cubs on it. And I realized I was getting into a heavy sports city. Okay, let me just set up this technology here.